Hey everyone, and welcome back to the GetwellbeE podcast. This podcast is designed to help you learn, expand what you thought was possible, and become as empowered as you can be in your health. This episode is one of the best things we do at WellBe straight up. It's called the WellBe Wrap-Up, and if you've been around in the WellBe community for a while, you're probably familiar with them. Real quick before we go any further, for anybody interested in my personalized, holistic patient advocacy services, I am opening up 2 spots and am having free discovery calls with people who are interested and might be good candidates for this offering. If you think that might be you, definitely get on my calendar and you can head to getwellbe.com to schedule a free discovery call with me. Or if you're more of an Instagram person, you can DM me to get that link for a call and we'll chat briefly about your case and whether or not I think I could be helpful. Every few months, we go through all of the important news that's come out related to health and wellness and pick out 8 to 10 of the most important stories we think you need to know to protect your and your family's health and make easy changes shown to improve your health. Sometimes the things we share are shocking. Sometimes they're just cool nuggets. But all of the stories are always chosen to help you become as empowered as you can be in your health. This is the first wrap-up of 2023. In it, we cover all the most important news pieces since our 2022 year-end wrap-up, which means we're looking back on everything that happened from January through March 2023. In this wrap-up, we're featuring 5 big, juicy health topics with our WellBe analysis, plus 5 more quick hits. Let's jump in. Story number 1. A new large study finds that natural immunity from contracting COVID provides as much protection as getting vaccinated, while another study found that getting a flu shot and the Pfizer COVID booster on the same day may raise your risk of stroke. In a meta-analysis published in The Lancet, researchers found that the immunity acquired from a COVID infection provides strong and lasting protection against the most severe outcomes of the illness. According to the study authors, the protection offered is at least as high, if not higher, than immunity generated from 2 doses of an mRNA vaccine. The study took data from 65 studies across 19 countries, which is a lot, comparing the risk of developing COVID again in people who had recovered from infections and people who hadn't been infected. They found that infection-acquired immunity cut the risk of hospitalization and death from a COVID infection, or rather a COVID reinfection, by a whopping 88% for at least 10 months. In other vaccine news, a review by the FDA found evidence that getting Pfizer's bivalent COVID booster shot and a flu shot on the same day may increase the risk of stroke. The study was small and only done on seniors because the reason for the review was that the country's vaccine surveillance system flagged a possible association between the bivalent booster and stroke in people over 65. But the link was there. Investigators found that among the 55,000 seniors in the database, 130 suffered strokes in the 21 days after receiving the Pfizer COVID booster. Reviewers concluded that seniors who received the booster on the same day that they received a flu vaccine had a heightened risk. It's important to note that the authors of the Lancet study related to natural immunity are still advising that people get vaccinated rather than wait to get infected. Their argument is that you never know if you'll be one of the people who gets sick or even dies from COVID, and that health officials still recommend that people get both the flu shot and the COVID booster since both the flu and COVID also raise a risk of stroke. But given this new risk information, they're not advising that you should do it on the same day if you're over 65. Now for WellBe's takeaway. We respect research findings and will take all of these recommendations into account. But both of these pieces of news drive home, once again, the fact that pharmaceuticals, like lab-made vaccines, come with side effects, and that newly developed drugs and vaccines have many unknowns, which often reveal themselves over the first few years or longer of testing them on humans. So we advise doing your own research and being cautious with anything new, since often we're not aware of all the risks until they've been around for quite some time. As always, your best protection against adverse health issues, whether we're talking about COVID, the flu, a stroke, or anything else is to keep your immune system strong and resilient and do everything you can to avoid chronic disease. That means reducing your toxic burden, prioritizing your gut health, avoiding unnecessary medications, and focusing on the 100 little choices that you make every day that are truly your healthcare. Story number 2. For a while now, researchers have been exploring psychedelics as a way to treat mental health issues like chronic depression. Now, a study explains why psychedelics are able to do this, while antidepressant drugs like SSRIs can't. The study, which was published in Science Journal, is a landmark discovery with big implications for how we treat mental health issues. It's fascinating, but it gets a little sciencey, so bear with me. Psychedelics can help promote the growth of neurons, which are the information messengers in our brains, and restore atrophied connections in the brain, which makes them promising potential treatments for stubborn mental illnesses like addiction and depression. Both serotonin, which is the happiness neurotransmitter and hormone, and psychedelic compounds like LSD and psilocybin, which is magic mushrooms, bind to the certain receptor that's important for cellular signaling in the brain, known as the 5-HT2A receptor. The idea is that by binding to this receptor, the compounds will trigger neuroplasticity effects that rewire the brain and address the addiction, depression, etc. So why do psychedelics appear to work while research shows that SSRI medications, which are medications that make more serotonin available in your brain, apparently, also known as antidepressants, don't work? Well, here's what the study found. Unlike other similar receptors, the 5-HT2A receptor that serotonin and psychedelics bind to is inside neurons rather than on their cellular surface. So in order to spark any change, compounds need to reach the receptor within. And while psychedelic compounds can easily penetrate cells, serotonin cannot. Given how many people struggle with depression and addiction, how many people are on antidepressants, it's over 13% of Americans, and how many side effects antidepressants come with, this kind of research into psychedelics could be game-changing. And what's more, for people who want the mental health benefits without experiencing a full-on trip, there are a growing number of companies working on designer psychedelics that help deliver the brain-changing neuroplasticity effects without all the pulsing colors and other hallucinations. So we hear. More research is, of course, needed, but we're hopeful that efforts like this will help move Americans away from their dependence on pharmaceutical drugs and offer a real solution to the growing epidemic of depression and other mental health conditions. Story number 3. Months after a train carrying toxic chemicals derailed in East Palestine, Ohio, and officials burned the contents of the train cars to avoid an explosion, residents have hired independent researchers to test for levels of toxins in the area, as they don't trust and are feeling dissatisfied with the EPA's testing results. For the first few months of the year, you couldn't look at the news without seeing at least one headline about the horrible train derailment in Ohio and the burning of millions of toxic chemicals that followed it. Now, though, the headlines have faded. Residents are still experiencing symptoms such as headaches, difficulty breathing, rashes, and nosebleeds, despite EPA reports that everything is fine and chemical levels are low and safe. The EPA, as well as local, state, and federal agencies, have been monitoring air and water quality in the area, but community members say that official reports are confusing, contradictory, and don't match their own lived experience. Because of that, they hired independent investigators to test chemical levels. The researchers found levels of acrolein, a chemical irritant that affects the eyes, skin, and respiratory system, were 3 times higher than they should be, and also found higher concentrations of 4 more acrolein-like compounds, as well as another compound of concern. The researchers, who came from Carnegie Mellon University, also said that more comprehensive testing of many more chemicals was needed to identify any harmful substances that could have formed during the controlled burning. Now, not to sound like conspiracy theorists, but it's important to remember that big companies and big agencies, including agencies meant to protect us like the EPA, don't have your health at the top of their priority list. You need to be your own advocate and do everything you can to protect your health and that of your loved ones. We feel deeply for the residents of East Palestine and applaud their efforts to get unbiased answers. And whether you live near or around East Palestine or not, the story is a reminder to do what you can to ensure the air you breathe, the water you drink, and the soil your food is grown in don't contain harmful substances. This means, among other things, getting a high-quality water filter for the contaminants in your area, in your water, and reducing indoor air pollution in your home by having a great air filter and also opening your windows routinely. Story number 4. Maternal death rates in the U.S. have reached their highest levels since the 1960s, making this the most dangerous, high-income country in which to give birth. According to data from the National Center for Health Statistics, the number of women who died during pregnancy or shortly after rose 40% to 1,205 in 2021, compared to 861 in 2020, and 754 in 2019. That works out to 33 maternal deaths per 100,000 births, which is the highest it's been since 1965. Black mothers were the most affected, experiencing a death rate that's 2.6 times higher than that of white women. 30% of maternal deaths were among Black women, despite them only making up about 14% of the U.S. population. While our broken healthcare system may certainly take some of the blame for this startling trend, shouldn't maternal mortality be going down, not up? There are a couple of other factors that may be more to blame. First off, COVID. Not only did the pandemic prevent people from getting the care they needed, but pregnant women were also at a higher risk of developing severe illness or dying from COVID, especially if they had no naturally acquired or vaccine-acquired immunity, or have other COVID risk factors. Which brings us to the next reason. The biggest driver of this increase in maternal deaths is likely the fact that more mothers have underlying chronic health conditions, which increases their risk of complications and death during labor and delivery. Chronic conditions like obesity, diabetes, and hypertension raise a mother's risk of experiencing delivery complications like pulmonary embolisms, uncontrolled bleeding, blood clots, or cardiovascular problems, all of which could lead to death in a worst-case scenario. The best way to protect yourself against serious illness, injury, or death is to avoid chronic health conditions by taking care of your health every day. That means a lot of things: eating a nourishing diet, getting regular movement, prioritizing sleep, keeping your stress levels low, and avoiding toxins, among other health-protecting efforts. It might seem like a lot, but it provides your body with more protection than any medication ever could, which is especially important during the vulnerable and formative period of pregnancy, labor, and delivery. We'll be right back with story number 5 after this quick message. I don't know about you, but I never listen to the end of a podcast, so I'm hopping in here to let you know that the best way to stay empowered and on top of your health is to be in the WellBe community. So head to getwellbe.com/subscribe to make sure you're in like Flynn. On getwellbe.com, you'll learn about my personalized, holistic patient advocacy services. I currently have a few spots open until the end of April, so schedule a free discovery call with me to see if it might be something that could be helpful to you, as well as my programs to help you go deeper and make life-altering changes to your health and our awesome non-toxic product database. If you're more of a social media person, let's be friends on Instagram. Find me at getwellbe. Okay, now back to the latest WellBe wrap-up. Story number 5. The CDC recently warned of a rapidly spreading treatment-resistant fungal infection in hospitals and other medical settings. And a separate new study shows that actively monitoring prostate cancer is as effective as invasive treatments like surgery or radiation. Okay, so what do these two things have to do with each other? I'll get to that. First, the CDC has published a report in the Annals of Internal Medicine warning about a type of fungus called Candida auris, or C. auris, which is spreading rapidly through the U.S. healthcare facilities. Their report looked at data from 2016 through 2021 and found that the number of infections increased about 60% from 2019 to 2020 and 95% from 2020 to 2021. The number of people carrying the fungus but not showing any symptoms increased by 21% in 2020 and by 209% in 2021. What's more, an increasing number of samples were resistant to common treatments. While the fungus doesn't do any harm to healthy people, it can cause severe illness and even death in people with weakened immune systems. And those who do become sick from C. auris, about 1/3 die. The fungus has been detected in more than half of U.S. states, and while it's only in healthcare facilities right now, it's only a matter of time before it makes its way into the general population. Given that healthy people aren't at risk for any adverse effects, the big concern here is people with compromised immune systems becoming infected, especially those who have invasive medical devices like a catheter, for example. Meanwhile, I'm going to get back to that prostate health news. A 15-year study compared 3 different approaches to prostate cancer among 1,600 men. The men were randomly assigned to get surgery, undergo radiation, or get active monitoring of their cancer, meaning doing nothing but making sure they stay on top of it. And their cancer was tracked in the years that followed. Researchers found that there was no significant difference in prostate cancer death rates between the 3 groups, nor significant difference in the cancer spread. Given these results and that monitoring techniques have only improved since the study began in 1999, the study authors believe men diagnosed with prostate cancer shouldn't panic or rush to invasive and aggressive treatment approaches. These 2 pieces of news might feel pretty unrelated, but they both underscore the importance of keeping yourself healthy to avoid hospital care and the invasive procedures done among them. Though hospitals are places theoretically designed to help restore you to health, they're often swarming with diseases, and when you're under the knife or hooked up to an IV, you're more vulnerable than ever to infection. Keeping your body healthy and taking the least invasive treatment approach whenever possible is a great way to stay out of the hospital and avoid going under the knife and protect yourself from serious illness and death. All right, now for our 5 health quick hits. Story number 6 is about a recently published peer-reviewed study that found that the American Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, an influential group that helps to shape U.S. food policy and makes recommendations to consumers on nutrition products, has financial ties, shocking, to some of the world's largest processed food companies. The documents included in the study showed that the group had a record of owning stock in ultra-processed food companies and has received millions in contributions from producers of processed foods, including Nestle, PepsiCo, Hershey, and Kellogg's. In related news, a huge maker of processed food, Kraft Heinz, has successfully lobbied to get its incredibly processed Lunchables product into school lunch programs. They reformulated the ingredients in Lunchables to meet standards in the National School Lunch Program, which are set by the USDA. We haven't seen the nutrition labels or the reformulated ingredients in Lunchables yet, but let's just say Lunchables are not going to help reverse the childhood obesity epidemic. In fact, they're likely going to make it worse. We think this is a major step back for American children. Story number 7. Speaking of big agencies not necessarily having our best interests at heart, a new report shows that the FDA isn't testing food additives, or food packaging for chemicals known to cause obesity and disrupt our metabolism. The report, published by the Center for Science in the Public Interest, is based off the idea of obesogen science. Who even knew that was a thing? Which proposes that certain chemicals known as obesogens stimulate the formation of fat cells, disrupt metabolism, and dysregulate appetite, all of which can result in obesity. Their analysis identified a ton of potential obesogens in the U.S. diet, including certain preservatives, MSG, certain artificial colors and flavors, and more, and noted that the FDA has no process in place to test for these chemicals. Given the raging obesity epidemic and all the chronic health issues that go along with it, this explains a lot and merits some serious concern. Story number 8. A new relatively large study found that the common artificial sweetener erythritol is associated with an increased risk of serious cardiovascular problems. Specifically, researchers found that consuming the sweetener raises risk of a major cardiac event, which includes heart attack and stroke within 3 years, as well as raising the risk of blood clots. We've written before about the health risks of artificial sweeteners, which include cancer, depression, and headaches, among others, and this is yet another reason to steer clear of these overly sweet chemicals. Skip sugar altogether and flavor with spices, or reach for a healthier, natural, sweet alternative like Manuka honey or maple syrup. Story number 9. For years now, research has shown that birth control pills containing the hormones estrogen and progesterone increase risk of breast cancer. However, there hasn't been much research on the effects of single hormone contraception. A new large review of medical records showed that progesterone-only contraception, such as the hormonal IUD and the mini pill, pose a similar risk. In the review, women taking any of these kinds of contraception, regardless of whether they contained one or two hormones, had a 20 to 30% increased risk of being diagnosed with breast cancer as compared to those not taking hormonal contraception. In the US, 14% of women ages 15 to 49 take oral birth control pills, and 10% use long-acting contraception like hormonal IUDs, making this a serious problem. We're always for reducing the amount of pharmaceuticals we put in our bodies, and this is especially true of hormones. So if you use any sort of hormonal contraception, we recommend you check out the WellBe Guide to the best birth control options for your health. You'll find that on getwellbe.com. And last but not least, story number 10, the FDA recently announced the recall of various frozen food products from Scenic Fruit Company due to a potential hepatitis A contamination. The affected products include frozen organic strawberries sold under the Kirkland Signature brand at Costco, as well as Trader Joe's organic tropical fruit blend. You can find the full list of potentially contaminated products on the FDA website. There have been 3 confirmed and 2 suspected hepatitis A cases in people who reported eating the frozen strawberries. Hepatitis A is a highly contagious infection that can be spread by consuming food or drink handled by a person with the infection, and it can result in liver disease. This news is a reminder that just because something has the term organic on it, it doesn't mean it's 100% safe. Whenever possible, thoroughly wash your own fruits and vegetables to ensure you're doing everything you can to protect yourself from contaminants, and avoid eating raw fruits and vegetables when eating out. Now that's it for the first WellBe wrap-up of 2023. Now, is there someone or multiple people in your life who might benefit from knowing this information? If so, share this episode with them or share the link to the written version on getwellbe.com, and you'll find that in the show notes. Knowledge is power, and it's always the first step towards change. Remember when people didn't know how dangerous cigarettes were? Now they do. And they make different choices because they have that knowledge. And hundreds of millions of lives around the globe have been saved as a result. This is the kind of thing we hope to do with the WellBe Wrap-Up every time we do one. Head to getwellbe.com to read all about this news and click on the links to go further, and make sure you become a WellBe Insider while you're there so you get all of our latest content and special offers weekly in your inbox. Don't forget that if you're interested in my personalized, holistic patient advocacy services, I have a few spots left and am having free discovery calls with people through the end of April to see if it might be helpful to you and learn about how I work. If you haven't already and found this episode helpful or interesting, subscribe to the podcast. This way you'll never miss a new episode and they'll be delivered to you whenever we publish a new one. And please, again, share this episode with family or friends who you think might find it valuable and informative. This is your host, Adrienne Nolan-Smith, and thanks again for listening to the Get WellBe podcast.